So yeah, now it's your turn. So may I just say a few words while you are here? It's very nice that you are here. I have to be near the microphone, okay? So Leslie Leiserowitz. Yes. My PhD commentor, together with Professor Meir Lahav, during the years 1994, 1998. So here I am on behalf of all your former students. And I'm sure that they will all agree with me that we are grateful to have been guided by this. It's A team. I'm telling you, it's an A team. We couldn't ask for more. And my appreciation persists to this day. And we heard a little bit, these 80s and 90s in this group, these were happy days. The Lahav Leiserowitz group used to travel to the synchrotron in Hamburg and enjoy, sometimes with some pain, right? With some pain, the GIXD fruitful results of the DAISY BW1 station, a Rolls-Royce for XRD monolayer films at air-water interface, which was established and exquisitely maintained by Professor Jens Hals-Nielsen and Dr. Christian Kier. So dear audience, these journeys were anything but straightforward, but with guidance of these two brilliant minds at the wheel, it was nothing short of a fantastic ride. Thank you, Leslie, for being a mentor for life. You heard about it from many others here, for teaching us lessons on maintaining good spirits and health, and drawing inspiration from science, art, and music, right? I wish you many more years of good health with your family, great family and friends, joyful science, peace in our beloved country, which is so important for you and for all of us. And then the rest will be excellent too. So, dear audience, please join me in welcoming the Academy member, Professor Leslie Leiserowitz, Les, as friends call him, to present your talk entitled From Shaping Crystals to Understanding How Antimalarial Drugs Work.
How do I start? There was a fighter whose name was Tene Galendo. I don't know whether anybody here knows who was Tene Galendo. Well, Tene Galendo, he was going to have into a boxing fight, and then he said, I should have stayed home. And I feel now, but just to give you a sense of who was Tene Galendo, have you ever seen the movie On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando? And Marlon Brando, he was got mixed up with all these mafia, and they beat him up, really. And one of the men who beat him up was Tene Galendo, who was actually an actor. And so, but basically I feel that you people spoke so much about me, and I really thought, my God, is this really me? And I thought, well, so I prepared these slides. And so when I started preparing them, it was, I spoke with Rapaport, Hanna, and I said, listen, Hanna, I just want to speak 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes. Let's get it over with, And then she said, no, Les, you have to show some slides. So I said, okay, well, maybe 5 slides. And so Hanna and I, we sat down and we just chose 5 slides. And then she said, okay, well, just let's continue. So the next day, after a few days, I told her, well, Hanna, maybe 5 slides is not enough. And so let's make it 10 slides. And then 10 slides also wasn't enough. And it went to 15 slides. And I'd kind of forgotten how to use PowerPoint and all this sort of stuff. And so then I went to Rita Shapalenko. And I said, listen, Rita, I just need to get these things kind of right, but most important, I want the pictures to be full of art. Science is kind of irrelevant because I didn't know who was going to come here. I said, at least I can show some pictures where the artistic element is at play. And that's more or less. Now, let me see. I have to remember exactly how to do these things. So just let me, so if I do this, good, so I know what to do. So I started in truth. Yes, Mr. Bayer? Oh, okay. So I learned crystallography the hard way. It was a long apprenticeship with Gerhard Schmidt, and I think it took me about 5 years or so. And just to give you a sense of what it is to learn the art and science of crystal structure determination, I would like to say just a few words what David Attenborough said about the subject. Now, David Attenborough, we all know, he spent his year in life producing documentaries on nature and nature and family. But David Attenborough, he spent several months studying, doing protein X-ray crystallography. And it said it was a terrible time, and he was glad he got rid of it. So anyway, but I didn't have that courage, and I didn't have that time, so I went along with the subject. So now, basically what I did was, I worked on, what was it now? So let's go to the next slide. I did my PhD with Gerhard Schmidt and Judy Bregman. And Judy Bregman was from Brooklyn Polytechnic. And the work was the crystal structure of a thermochromic material. But I was the foot soldier. I did all the work, all the hard work, and they gave me instructions. Anyway, but the problem was, of course, thermochromic material as a material that changes color with temperature. And of course, Gerhard Schmidt told me, all you have to do is to determine the structure. We get the structure at high temperature, we get the structure at low temperature, and we will be able to explain the model. And this was all very good, determined the structure, but the structure just wasn't good enough. It didn't confirm the model. And so I said, okay, well, I will try to improve the data. So I took the X-ray diffraction data, and I corrected that data for intrinsic X-ray absorption in crystals. And this took months and months and months and months. And I did this work, and it is kind of described here. And it was published. It was, in fact, useful. But it was useful for me in other ways. Years later, it was useful for me in the work I was doing with Michael Elbaum and Sergei Kapishnikov and Jens Nielsen. And this was malaria, because we were, in fact, looking at, we were engaged in X-ray imaging. And I understood all of a sudden that what I had done was, in fact, related to X-ray imaging. And the other thing was, I had collected a kind of a toolbox of computer programs related to crystal shape and crystal morphology. And this became very useful in later years when I started working with Meir and Leah and the group. Now, I then after my PhD, I had to set up an X-ray diffraction lab at the University of Heidelberg and to determine the crystal structures. And this was a real problem because it was a daunting problem, these complicated molecules. And I didn't want to spend my time doing that sort of stuff. So in desperation, I said that I thought, well, let's try to put into code, onto program, methods called direct methods for X-ray crystal structure determination. And what that actually was, there were two boys from New York City. One was Jerome Kerr, it was Carl and Hauptmann, and they had developed a mathematical method that if you plug in your X-ray data and you turn some wheels, the structure pops out. I mean, it wasn't quite like that, but that was the basic idea. And so I programmed this method in Heidelberg, and the structure came out with no problem. And then I realized that crystallography was done. It was done. All the old work, all the art was in fact lost. And this was so big, and I don't know whether you people appreciate this. For example, in the world of pharmaceutical chemistry, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of structures. And nowadays they're simply done with they could collect the data, you press the button, and the structure simply pops out. And I coded that in 1966, and Karl and Hauptmann obtained in 1972 the Nobel Prize, and that in fact changed the world of chemistry. So when I came back to the Institute, I think Meir mentioned it a little. So I thought I have to try to learn to do science. Crystal structure determination is done. It's done and finished with. And so I started working on the molecular assembly of hydrogen-bonded molecules, and I tried to understand how these molecules get together, and I tried to form co-crystals, that is, different hydrogen-bonded molecules in the same crystal. And this reminded me a little bit of what Meir was doing at the time. And Meir was engaged in host-guest chemistry, and so it's also a co-crystal, the host molecule and the guest molecule. And then there was a photoreaction between host and guest, and the problem was that the guest molecule, their arrangement was very complicated, and I helped him trying to solve this crystal problem. And then, of course, Meir was working on something else. Let me see where I get the words right. It was asymmetric. I'm a little bit confused now. It was absolute asymmetric synthesis using the solid state. And it was based on the idea of chirobiogenesis. And so I said, but what is this in basic terms? And Meir spoke a little bit about it, and also Leah. And so if you look at the molecules of life, and let's say amino acids, and let's say it's shaped like my left hand, but you don't have there's no mirror image, it's only the left hand. And so there was the problem of the origin of homochirality. And Meir was really interested, and his group were really interested in this problem. And it was the goose that laid the golden egg, because from that work they had developed these tailor-made additives. And these tailor-made additives became extremely useful. And so I want to show you now. So now all the slides that I chosen were only chosen for art, right? The content, the scientific content, is neither here nor there, but all of these pictures, I consider them to be very beautiful. And so what was done, this was the work that we did, molecular recognition at crystal interfaces, and in fact, Leah touched upon it. And so what I'm going to speak about is just a little bit of the uses of these tailor-made additives. And what I really loved was this work. Something went awry here. Yes, it was first a slide. And so this was by, so what we did here was crystal morphological engineering. And I think Leah also spoke about it a little bit. In other words, if you take a crystal, I have a problem. If you take a crystal of benzamide and it comes as almost as a square, and if you grow it in the presence of a tailor-made additive, say benzoic acid, you get a needle one way. If you do it in the presence of orthochlorobenzamide, the crystal's another way. And if you crystallize it in the presence of paramethylbenzamide, you get, and so this was a way. And now you think, so what's the big deal? I mean, say you have crystal morphological engineering, what's the big deal? Now, Leah touched upon it, because how does nature do it? But it's not only nature. In the world of crystal, in the pharmaceutical world, you have to be able, when the drugs are being formed, the crystals have to be of a certain shape, and they have to have certain phases so that they can be easily dissolved in the bodily fluids. So this kind of work was really important. Then the other thing was that we also, so just let me go backward a little bit because things are a little bit, so this was also a beautiful picture, and Leah also alluded to it, and this was the question of the assignment of the absolute configuration of molecules. And I think Meir also touched upon it. So you have a chiral molecule, but the problem was that normal crystallography, you could not solve the crystal structure with normal X-ray diffraction. And so you had to apply all sorts of esoteric methods for crystal structure determination. That was really complicated. And so with the use of tailor-made additives, it was so easy, it was so beautiful that you were able to assign the absolute configuration of the molecules of life simply by growing crystals of amino acids in the presence of additives. And this figure, I thought, is one of the most beautiful figures that we have ever prepared. And here, of course, now Leah also showed us that if you grow these crystals in the presence of tailor-made additives, there's a reduction of symmetry. But Leah has an artistic bent, and so she showed it with these men, I think, with a hat and without the hat. And so we thought, well, okay, I wanted to do it a little differently because I remembered the pattern, the wall pattern. There's a pattern in the Alhambra in Granada, and it really struck me. And so we took the pattern on the left, which comes from one of the wall patterns in the Granada of the Alhambra, and then we also, so we showed these mixed crystals. And of course, so this was, and Meir to this day is working on, I think, on the reduction of symmetry in connection with piezo and piezoelectricity. So next, we jumped at one point, and we jumped to the air-water interface. And we were using amphiphilic molecules, in fact, for inducing crystallization of other molecules at the interface. And now, Hanna Rapaport had prepared this beautiful figure on the left, and it shows you the amphiphilic molecule. It is the hand of God from the Sistine Chapel. I'm sure you realize, painted by Michelangelo, right? And so those are the monolayers, and in fact, they induce nucleation as Jarek Majewski's slide, and there to the right is the grazing instance X-ray diffraction experiment. And I think Jarek also showed, but I don't think you really realize what a revolution we had here when these people, when Jens Nielsen and Christian Kerr developed this instrument. Now let me just try to give you a sense of things. The crystals that we worked with are, say, 1/10 of a millimeter, 2/10 of a millimeter in size, right? And so the size of the molecule, let's say it's 1 nanometer. And so you have 100,000 layers, right? That's a crystal, 100 to 200,000 layers. and you zap such a crystal with X-rays, and you get an X-ray diffraction pattern. But now I only have one layer. But now can I increase the X-ray intensity by 100,000? I will burn that material. And not only that, I have the problem of the background from the X-ray background, from the water and from the air. And so when Jens Nielsen and Christian Kerr designed this instrument, it was really fantastic technology. And so we went ahead and we determined the crystalline thin film architectures at the air-water interface, and it was really a very interesting and exciting time. Now, at some point, we said to ourselves, well, cholesterol is in fact an amphiphilic molecule. It has a hydrophobic body, it has a hydrophilic head group, it will float on the water surface, and so let's try to study its structure layer by layer. And in fact, Leah discussed this. And I'm not going to say very much, but I'll just say the following. So this is another view of the development of these crystals, of cholesterol, 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers, 4 layers. And Leah also mentioned, in fact, the work by Hanna Rapaport and Ina Solomonov. But it started a little before that, because we gave this to 2 Frenchmen that Jens Nielsen mentioned. It was Frank Livier and Didier Jacquemin, and I told him, okay, Frank Livier, you calculate the diffraction pattern of cholesterol monohydrate, and we go to the synchrotron, and you take the detector, and you put it at this angle, and we should see the peak. And there was nothing. And these guys had worked for months, and they didn't want to speak with me. For months, they were so annoyed. Frank Livier and Didier Jacquemin. I think 3, 4, 5 years later, we said, we had, okay, well, let's try again. Maybe we'll see a diffraction pattern. And that was Sylvain Lafont, that was Hanna Rapaport, and they went, and we went, and this time we had an undulator beamline. That means the intensity was much stronger. And all we got was a broad peak. And it took us months to understand what that broad peak was about. And then at this time, we read, you read these books about monolayers, and we were told that that if you compress the monolayer, I've forgotten a precise word, but it destroys. It's destroyed. In other words, once you compress the monolayer beyond some point, I've forgotten the name of the point is, it's completely, and then it was, I think, Ivan Kosmenko and Hanna Rapaport, and they compressed the monolayer, and lo and behold, we got a biolayer that was crystalline. And that, I think, was shown by Leah. And of course, by banging on the table here, things are moving apart. Okay, Ani Sipaseta. So it took 30 years to go from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. And that started with Sylvain Lafont and Hanna Rapaport and Ina Solomonov and Roy Ziblatt and Neta Bassano and Anna Hirsch and Rita Shepalenko. And that was, in fact, so we managed to get an understanding of the early crystallization of cholesterol. Now, about 25 years ago, a student in our group, her name was Ronit Buller. She had read a very interesting paper in Nature about cholesterol, about malaria pigment crystal. And I was amazed, simply amazed that malaria was, in fact, a form of pathological crystallization. And because my father had spent many years in Kinshasa and Rwanda, Burundi, and he'd taken, and he had to take quinine, and it caused blotches on his arm and stinging in the ears. And all the years I had read about, even in South Africa, about the social economic effects. So I thought, well, okay, maybe one should try to work on this malaria pigment crystal. Now, so I started working on these crystals, but really the synthetic form of the malaria pigment. Now, just to give you some idea of what the disease is all about, right? So there's the Anopheles mosquito. It inoculates the body with the parasite. At some point, the parasite, in fact, invades the red blood cell, and over 2 to 3 days, it consumes about 80% of the hemoglobin to produce let's call them daughter parasites. But there was a problem there, and the problem was, of course, that the heme is toxic to the parasite. So, because of the iron is in fact the iron atom is in fact can cause a lot of damage. So the parasite then simply forms a dimer, pair of molecules, and this pair of molecules then crystallizes. And when the cell is ruptured, these crystals, in fact, they cause intense pain until they're caught in the spleen. And but there was an important point, and the important point that was given was that the quinine drug is believed to, in fact, some way implicated in the mode of action of antimalarial drugs. And so it was with, I think, Michael Elbohm at the time of the Institute. He was interested in malaria from a completely different angle. But I spoke to Michael, and Michael suggested for some of the problems that we use X-ray imaging, soft X-ray imaging. And I also spoke to Jens Alsniersen, and Jens Alsniersen was also interested in the question. And so what we did was we, in fact, got gone. So after about many years, now this idea that I had of entering the world of malaria, it's very similar, reminds me of a saying by Lao Tzu that 1,000-mile march begins with a single step, and that was precisely it. And this figure was produced by Netta Fasano. So we had, in fact, after many years of work, we were able to study the nucleation of the malaria pigment, the growth of the malaria pigment, the mode of action of antimalarial drugs. And in the review that we wrote, I tried to impress upon Sergei Kapishnikov that he must prepare a figure which shows us all. Now, I had a fantastic figure, a graph that I once received from Michael McBride. I knew about this. It was a graph prepared by a French engineer in 1860, and it was about the invasion of Russia by Napoleon. And you look at this graph, and in 10 minutes, you understand exactly what happened to Napoleon. So I said, Sergei, you take this beautiful picture that I got from Michael McBride, and you use this picture to produce a scheme which shows what goes on in the food vacuole of the malaria parasite that is the growth of the crystal, nucleation, growth, and the mode of action. And this is the picture that Sergei produced. And I'm not going to discuss it. It's too complicated, and I don't want to discuss it. So now, there was one problem with the crystal structure of the malaria pigment that was published 25 years ago. There was something wrong with it, basically wrong. And a couple of years ago, I started with Michael Elbaum, discussed it with him many times. And Michael thought it would be a good idea to use electron diffraction and study and determine the crystal structure of the malaria pigment using electron diffraction. And it was published just several months ago, and that structure was revealed. And in fact, but here I've shown one of the students who this is a picture on the left showing the crystal structure of the malaria pigment. But the guy who did this drawing, his name was Paul Klar. And we told him, Paul, to show the heme, we want you to show it in the form of a khamsa. Khamsa, 5 hands, so the heme can be oriented this way or that way. But they didn't know what a khamsa was. So he produced these figures. And so instead of 5 fingers, he had 4 fingers. And we told him, but you know, Paul, we want it with 5 fingers. And they objected. They didn't want. And so we're stuck with this 4 figure, and we want a khamsa, and we don't have it. So, but anyway, but the truth of the matter is that we were able to determine the crystal structure of the malaria pigment and what actually happened. Now, but I want to go back and this is the last working slide. And this is, as I told you, we had, in fact, we're working on the mode of action of anti-malarial drugs. And this work was done by Sergei Kapishnikov. And you can see it very easily. So, in fact, the drug targets the malaria pigment as it is being produced. So this is what you have on the top. You see these lines. These are those are the crystals of the malaria pigment. It's in X-ray fluorescent images, and in the rows below, that is the X-ray fluorescence of the drug. But actually, they should be one on top of another. So what you actually have is these drugs. They bind to the crystals, and they prevent them from growing. Now, let me try to give you an analogy. Let's say you're in the motor car business, right? And we are assembly lining. So in the assembly line manufacture of cars, let's say these cars are being manufactured 500 a day, okay? So it goes through the assembly line, and as the cars are arriving at the end of the assembly line, in fact, the drivers drive the car off. But let's say the drivers are on strike, but the men in the assembly line don't know this. And so the cars all pile up at the end. And that's exactly what's happening with the parasite. The parasite is generating 3,500 dimers per second over a period of 24 hours in a small compartment to generate 50 crystals growing. Now, let's say that the drug, in fact, binds to the surface and stops the crystal from growing. But the parasite doesn't know this. The parasite's churning out these dimers. And so, in fact, it kills itself. So I think I've tried to mix a little bit of art and a little bit of science. And I just want to say, what good science is all about. Now, the man, this E.O. Wilson, wrote this, and I thought this was a fantastic description of what good science is. And the best of science doesn't consist of mathematical models and experiments as textbooks make it seem. They come later. It springs from old facts and fresh metaphors and the scrambled, crazy images of things recently seen. To move forward is to concoct new patterns of thought, which in turn dictate the design of the models and experiments, easy to say and difficult to achieve. Now, at some point, I was working, it was part of it with Addadi, on the Madagascar spider. And there was a woman, a Hungarian woman, who was working. She was employed at the museum in Harvard. And I used to go and see her from time to time when we were visiting Verd. And because she was working on this Madagascar spider, and there was this determination of the crystal stock, of the crystals inside the Madagascar spider. But the interesting thing was E.O. Wilson, he used to come in twice a week, and I tried to meet him, but I wasn't able to. So now, these days, all I do, in the mornings, I go to the Weizmann house and I listen to birdsong. But sometimes I go with the Hanna in the morning and I go watch a movie. And so she goes with her friends, and one of them, her name is Michal Amsterdam, and she said to me, where does the Hanna get this brute force energy from? And I said, well, you know, I didn't tell her that many years ago when I was supposed to go on a postdoc and set up an X-ray diffraction lab at the University of Heidelberg. And the head of our department, Schmidt, was very concerned because we had 2 small children and the Hanna was pregnant. So Schmidt sent our secretary, Madame Lux, to speak with the Hanna how one can alleviate the situation. We get to Heidelberg, how will the Hanna manage? And so the Hanna told Madame Lux, there's no problem. And so Madame Lux went back to Schmidt and told Schmidt that the Hanna told him there's no problem. Well, so the day comes, the 1st of October, 1966, we fly to Frankfurt. We end up in Heidelberg. We reach our apartment. We dump our bags, and I'm exhausted. Simply exhausted. How does one start? And the Hanna is sitting, and then her 2 friends, Gloria and Gisela, come to visit her. They want tea, and the Hanna was up, and she was no longer tired, and then she got started. So now, during those years, we bought a sewing machine. It was a Husqvarna sewing machine. It was a beautiful Swedish sewing machine, and I loved to sit and listen to the Hanna sewing and preparing clothes for the girls. And that reminded me, and when I was a boy, this is the Hanna, in fact, painted by my sister. And we went to, it reminded me that when I was a little boy in Johannesburg, I used to sit on the floor of the sewing machine and listen to my mother sew, because it always calmed me. And here is a picture. I don't know, do you recognize? This was painted by my sister 45 years. On the top left-hand side, you can see the head of a woman. Can you see the head of a woman? How does, in God's name, I've forgotten how to use these things. But you see the head. Can you see the sewing machine just below? And there's a model to the right. And that is the picture that my sister painted. This is the copy. So now I just want to get to the next, and this is acknowledgements. So now first I want to thank Yael for all the organizing. I want to thank Hanna Rapaport for doing so much of the organizing. I want to thank David Harel for giving the green light that we could have this kind of a meeting. I want to thank the speakers. It is particularly those who came from overseas. It was Yarek and Kiara. I want to thank all of you who came along. But now, as far as thanking, I spoke here for many people in giving this work. I don't think I did such a good job, but that doesn't matter. I no longer care, to be absolutely honest with you. But I do feel that we made some kind of a contribution. And now, but there is no doubt we want to thank all the postdocs, all the students, the technical staff. And many years a day, I sit with Meir Lahav and go to his office, and we speak about the old times and the students and postdocs who are with us. Now, there's just one last thing, of course. All of this would not have been, a lot of this on my part, would not have been achieved, but my wife has this enormous energy. But I wanted to say one more thing, that I know that I would not have been allowed to write it. It's all very well saying this, but for many evenings, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. I went to work. I wasn't at home. I went to my office. And the Chama, she always kept in good humor. But I went to work and I spent my time with a lady. And I had conversations with this lady. And if I was nice, she was very nice to me. And her name was Science. And this is exactly so this is on this note I want to finish. Thank you very much.